was a big turn where there was kind of a protracted battle as Franco carefully moved down from the north, meeting people like the nationalists up from the south. And what he really tried to do was very carefully consolidate his political power, make sure he was absolutely sure in his position before he moved on, which kind of frustrated some of his allies. But this Ebro River was a big turning point. It was a long, protracted battle. Nationalist forces, including the international brigades, withdrew while Mussolini supported Franco more and more and more. So this was around 1938. The tide here was starting to turn. The troop balances were starting to switch, and the nationalists, the Republicans, I apologize, the people fighting against Franco, because I do know the names can be confusing, were on the back foot at this time. By 1939, Franco had won, but 2% of the Spanish population had died in the process. While in power, Franco decided to reward those who had helped him. He decided to work continuously with Hitler to repress adversaries, sending his own citizens to Nazi death camps and passing along a list of Spanish Jews to Heinrich Himmler. Franco's despotic practices, which lasted until he died in 1975, left at least 150,000 people dead, and as many as the really wide range is from 30,000 to 200,000 dissidents murdered under the Franco regime. The democratic transition depended on a carefully orchestrated bid to forget the history of Franco. And this was a history that was really deeply, not necessarily about fascism in the ideological sense, but more than that, almost a medieval restoration, a modern 1930s feudalism. We had people at this time, officials close to Franco, coming out and saying, yeah, I liked it better when, and of course, he would never have to deal with this problem. I liked it better when there was no running sewage, because then people would just get dysentery, they get the plague, they die. All this new technology, that just doesn't thin the population enough. We need to rely on disease to thin the population. Of course, he would never be exposed to that disease. So again, really, really showing the priorities there. It's just a view of his own countrymen. This is to subscribe to the Spanish ideology, the true Franco ideology. You have to see your own countrymen, your own people in your country as lesser, and you and a small select group of people as the only people worthy of any respect. One of Franco's top aides talked of democratically chosen politicians as cloven-hooved beasts, and anything that smacked of modernity, from Rotary clubs to Montessori schools, seemed to draw the regime's violent wrath. Echoing the Inquisition, Franco, and that's a great way of putting it, kind of Inquisition-like, Franco ordered particularly despised foes to put to death with the garrote, in which the executioner tightens an iron collar around a person's neck. There's also something really medieval about the first class divisions that arose in 1930s Spain, with great latifundistas whose estates were worked by these peasants so hungry they stole acorns from pig troughs. Paul Preston, the author of the book Homage to Catalonia, that's George Orwell, I apologize, The Process of Extermination, was what he wrote. They were often, like Preston described, the Franco's officials had for the lower classes, they viewed him as the Rifts tribesmen. They viewed him as equivalent with the same people that they were oppressing abroad, which is not something that you normally see from kind of imperial leaders. They always have this certain different way of treating the people back home. But really, it was the same. It was, for them, it was the upper class, and it was everybody else. They saw it for really what it was, which is a class-driven society, but it was kind of all in reverse of the socialism and Bolshevism that they were fighting against. With Hitler and Mussolini supplying arms to Franco and the Soviet Union to the embattled Spanish Republic, the death toll of the 1936-39 war was enormous. Some 200,000 soldiers died in the battle, and a further large but unknown number of civilians were killed by Franco's bombing of Spanish cities and vast columns of refugees in flight. And what Paul Preston really does in this book, and this is I'm going to read here a little bit now from a New York Times review of it by Adam Hochschild Hochschild in May 11th of 2012 in the New York Times. What he talks about here in this book is what really I kind of want to delve more into, which is the history of the extermination that took place here. Approximately 200,000 men and women deliberately executed during the war, and kind of the purges of the cities that Franco did after he conquered them, and the 20,000 supported the Republic that were shot after it ended, and the additional tens of thousands of civilians and refugees who died in concentration camps in the prisons. So Preston really said that this book was a pretty painful one to write. It really is quite the Spanish Holocaust is what's called. It's quite a narrative. But here's one woman in the testimony that Spain had in 2012 that they were dealing with this. A Spanish law that made investigating those crimes illegal is now being questioned. The crimes of Franco. That was probably not passed under the best circumstances, but now there has been this truth committee that was established a few years back in 2012 to kind of investigate it, and that has led to all these testimony coming up. One instance of this is Maria Martin Lopez, now 81 years old, told Spanish Supreme Court judges how when she was 6, Franco, or was 81 years old back in 2012, when she was 6, Franco supporters came to her house and took her mother away. They shot her. My father had me go with him to find her body. Later we found her. They'd stripped her naked and thrown her clothes in the brambles. Jesus Christ. Just executions, rapes, as you can imagine, just horrific treatment of any kind of dissenter in the Spanish Orthodoxy. Spaniards like Martin have long been barred from testifying in court by Spain's Franco-era amnesty law passed in 1977. But if years ago, a Spanish investigative judge, Baltasar Garzón, challenged the law and began to investigate, he argued that killings were clearly crimes against humanity. Garzón used the same principle to have the late Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet arrested in 1998, despite Chile's own amnesty law. For trying the same thing at home, Garzón is now on the docket. Among the victims, there is outrage that Garzón is under investigation, not the crimes themselves, which is really kind of insane. It really shows you how far people are still behind on this. But there is still a struggle today to reconcile with these horrific crimes. And I do want to talk more about it, but first, there is some more history to share. There was still the matter of what to do with the war that was going on at the time, World War II. And really what was a very kind of tough thing was to keep himself, Franco, equidistant, because he knew he couldn't get in after a brutal 3-year fight against the Republicans. He couldn't get to another war with Hitler. They went back and forth, and really what Spanish... and this kind of goes to what I was saying earlier about reestablishing the imperial monarchy and reestablishing Spanish glory. He really wanted to go in and would do it in exchange for African colonies that Hitler had conquered. That's what was Franco's price for support. That's what he wanted from Hitler to support him. But Hitler was like, no, I'm not going to do that. Sorry. I don't know if he said sorry, but he did famously say that he would rather have 4 teeth pulled out than talk with Franco again. So from there, he stayed relatively neutral and even somewhat warmed up to the Allies by the end of the war. Really, though, throughout the most intense moments of the war, always being very careful to play both sides. For example, letting Allied fighter pilots rejoin their country, and letting Operation Barbarossa come through against the Soviet Union. I'm sure actually that was no skin off his back, but still, it is kind of an example of how he played both sides throughout the Civil War. Or I apologize, World War II. Now that he had solved that, Franco faced a new question: what to do with the monarchy? And that was a tough question because, of course, the now very much traditionalist, because all the other people who had been shot or imprisoned or dispossessed of any kind of material power in society, the now very traditionalist Spain was very much for the monarchy. He held a nice little democratic referendum to decide whether or not the monarchy should be allowed back. But there was a little bit of a problem. What would he do about it? This is a new force. The monarchy could now attain some power and possibly threaten him. Well, he simply just kept himself as regent and gave himself the privilege to appoint another regent before his death. So, problem averted there. Now the question was, who was going to take the throne? It seemed like the next guy would be a guy named Don Juan of Bourbon, the Count of Barcelona. But Franco had a little bit of a problem with his own base, because the Falangist sect, the Falangist movement, was a anti-monarchic movement, did not like the king, while the Carlists were for the king and the reestablishment of the monarchy in general. Juan Carlos solved these problems by appointing his king, Franco solved these problems by appointing his king, Don Juan of Bourbon, the Count of Barcelona's 10-year-old son, who was named Juan Carlos. He quickly went to Madrid to pose no threat to Franco and begin his training. Again, he was 10 at the time, and began his training quickly to become a monarch. Franco also had another problem. He still had that fascist stank on him for a while after the war, and he decided what could he do? What could he do to at least? Well, of course he was fascist, but what could he do to kind of convince the world that he wasn't going to be that bad? Well, he decided to, some sources say, using forced labor from Republican prison camps, build this big monument that has the bones of 50,000 soldiers, 50,000 fallen soldiers of the Republican Army, called the Valley of the Fallen. This monument built very pretty, actually, if you look at the pictures, over 20 years. And this is kind of something that a lot of people, kind of moderate historians, say, oh, he was used to, people who are kind of, I think, misrepresenting what we actually know about him, is that this was nothing but a political play. Like, this was something that was meant to appeal to kind of figures like the United States, people who were actually really running the show at the time, that he wasn't going to pose a threat. He wasn't going to be looking for trouble, but he would still really keep these kind of rebellious factions, these socialist factions, these factions that kind of challenged capitalist and traditionalist Spanish orthodoxy. They would be very much kept at bay. And this monument was really kind of a cheap concession that really cost him nothing, but looked really very good. And may, again, have been built with forced Republican labor from prison camps. That's really all it was. It was a political stunt, nothing more than that. But that was his real big move to try and put a public face over it. The ever-shrewd politician in general, Franco, to make himself appear a little bit less problematic to the outside. Oh yeah, you guessed it, baby. Franco's reconciliation trip with the West was not over yet. His anti-communist stance made him very, very popular with United States leaders at the time, like the psycho idiot Harry Truman. And he was welcomed in the year 1950 into the United Nations. Yes, the executor-in-chief, the dissenter murderer, the city purger, was welcomed with open arms by a United States that was only looking for one thing: world power and destruction of communism. And this is what it kind of saw as the best path to get there. And by golly, we welcome them into the United Nations. And when they, of course, let us build 4 military bases in Spain, we welcome them into NATO as well. God bless America. Land of the free, home of the brave. Gotta love it. He also got a pretty big nod from Pope Pius the 12th, not the 13th. Pope Pius the 13th, I think, is a young pope, but Pope Pius the 12th. But not, if you look at his legacy, folks, not very good. But we do have, what we do see here is the nice nod of legitimacy from the Vatican that he can appoint the Spanish bishops. He gets that nod from the Vatican, further legitimizing him worldwide as someone who should be taken seriously.